I'm MassLive Politics editor John Misek. Thanks for joining us. We're talking this morning with John Deaton, Republican candidate for United States Senate. He's running against Democratic incumbent United States Senator Elizabeth Warren of Cambridge in a heavily Democratic state and in a closely watched race. We'll be taking your questions in the comments, and we'll be having some questions from MassLive reporters as we move on through the morning. Mr. Deaton, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I guess the obvious first question is why?
The reason to run, when you learn my story, it's impossible to not agree, no matter what your political affiliation, that I am the absolute living, breathing embodiment of the American dream. I grew up welfare and food stamps, single mother, father not in the picture, living in the top 5 worst neighborhoods in America, surrounded by violence and drugs all my life. First person to graduate high school, only person in my family to graduate high school. So when you learn that story of poverty and violence and the fact that now I'm challenging one of the most entrenched Washington elites in DC, it's because I see the American dream that I represent dying. I question, could a kid in Springfield, Roxbury, or Brockton do what I did if they were given an opportunity and willing to work hard like I did? And so when you look, John, at the multiple crises we face, illegal immigration, debt crisis, opioid addictions, inflation, cost of living, foreign wars. The greatest crisis we face in America today is a crisis of leadership. You have people like Elizabeth Warren and Republicans as well. They sit back, they fuel the division between us so that they can stay in power. And I think it's time we had someone who looked like me, who has my life experience, overcoming poverty, cancer. In my 40s, I couldn't pay my bills on time. You know, just like a lot of Americans and people in the Commonwealth. And when you look at the Senate, you don't see someone like that. And I always say Senator Warren desperately wants to keep the job and hold on to the power. I desperately want to go do the job.
You've painted her more than once as out of touch with the interests of average Massachusetts voters. Can you point to a specific interest where you think she lost the plot, where her interests diverged from those of the voters?
Well, it's a matter of loyalty. Senator Warren is loyal to the Democratic Party and to an agenda, the progressive agenda, and to her own ambitions more than working people. You know, for example, she talks about income inequality a lot and the wealth gap. It's increased every year that she's been in office, by the way. Her policies don't help poor people, something I'm desperately passionate about, because when I say I come from poverty, I come from extreme poverty. Listen to my mother cry at night because she couldn't put us food on the table. Many nights like that. And those kind of cries where you're experiencing your mother's shame and humiliation and guilt that she can't put food on the table, that lives inside you. It doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank, by the way. And so Senator Warren's policies actually exclude those people and keep them down. And there's lots of policies where she's out of touch. She's an extremist. In this race between me and her, I'm the centrist moderate. She's the extremist. You know, and we can talk about how her policies are extreme if you want to, but it really is an approach. Her approach is about fighting against things and issues. It's not the same as fighting for things and issues. For example, she's great at talking about fighting against the rich and the wealthy, but John, that's not the same as fighting for the poor and for the middle class. It's a fundamental different approach. And we see impacts in the Commonwealth from it. You know, like if you take the hospitals that we've lost, 2 hospitals. Well, United Healthcare wanted to buy Stewart. But no, that's a big bad corporation. She objected to it, and now we lost 2 hospitals. Amazon wanted to buy iRobot. Oh no, it's a big bad company. She fought against it, and it didn't happen, and now people lost their jobs in the Commonwealth. Just because it sounds good.
What would you have done differently in those instances?
In those instances, I would have probably supported. I would have looked at I think there was a $900 million deal on the table. I would have made sure that there's safeguards in place. But, you know, United Healthcare is in the business of doing it. Is it a big for-profit company? Sure. But they're in that business. And so if your claim is that you want private equity out, and that the Ralph DeLatorre and all these others are bad people. Why would you object? She objected simply because it involves a major corporation. You know, before this race, I represented 627 token holders in Massachusetts, and I did it for free, pro bono, who were being absolutely victimized by the Securities Exchange Commission and overreach. I reached out to Senator Warren. She sits on the banking committee, which oversees the SEC. I couldn't get a meeting with an intern. And I'm like, I represent hundreds of your constituents. She didn't want to because they were going against a couple billionaires. And I was like, I don't care about that. I'm talking about the regular people being impacted. But that's the thing. It's her image that she's going to fight against these, companies. That doesn't mean you're doing the right thing.
Let's back up to Stewart for a moment. Senator Markey's committee recently voted to hold Dr. De La Torre in contempt for failing to appear before that committee. A lot that's been written about how his management style helped crater that company. Do you believe he should be held accountable in some way for the collapse of Stewart, and if so, how?
100%, and I think there should be, and this is where Senator Warren and I could agree, certainly, I'm assuming she would agree with me, that an investigation should be done. But she bears some of the responsibility for interjecting when there could have been a road to save those two hospitals. And I'll show you another example. I'm glad you brought this up. She was on Boston Public Radio, and she was asked, does Governor Healy deserve any criticism for the way of handling the bankruptcy? Senator Warren, who's an expert in bankruptcy, goes, oh no, it's all, the greedy corporations. Shame on her, because that's what I mean by loyalty. Governor Healy, she won't criticize her because she's a Democrat, right? But Senator Warren knows bankruptcy law better than I do. Mass was a creditor. You go in there and you ask for a trustee. You litigate, because you can ask for the court to appoint a trustee if there's gross incompetence, if there is dishonesty, or gross mismanagement. Those are the standards. So Massachusetts should have litigated that. The Neshoba Hospital closed 83 days or 85 days sooner than the statutory 120 days. Mm-hmm. So all I'm saying is I'm not blaming Governor Healy for the collapse, but you certainly can bear some responsibility and say you should have been more aggressive in fighting inside the bankruptcy court to protect people. You can find money for the migrants, but you can't find money to save these hospitals. But Senator Warren's incapable of being that kind of objective, independent voice, and that's what I want to bring. I have criticized the Republican leadership as much as anyone in this country. I've also criticized the far left leadership, such as Senator Warren and others.
There are now 3 shuttered hospitals: Sinai in Stoughton, Neshoba Valley and Ayers, you said a moment ago, and Kearney in Dorchester. Now effectively healthcare deserts in those 3 communities. How does Senator Deaton ensure access to care for the citizens in those towns?
Well, one thing is, as a federal senator, right, there's these state issues, but you can leverage things. Like you can use your office to work for Massachusetts. And so, take the 2 bridges on Cape Cod. When Charlie Baker was a governor, a Republican governor, he was trying to get money. Senator Warren wasn't very helpful. She should have been trying to help, but he's a Republican. We don't want a Republican to win if we're a Democrat. That's what I mean. But these hospitals, there's a rainy day fund of $8 billion in the state. I think this is a rainy day. And so I think that the person sitting in the federal Senate seat, even though there's some of these state issues, can use the power of that seat to leverage and say, listen, if you want federal money, you want subsidies, you want tax credits and all these things from the federal government, then you need to make sure that you're doing what's right for the citizens.
All right, and pause for a moment to bring in MassLive reporters Will Ketcher and Juliet Schulman-Hall. Well, first question,
there's no doubt we're in the midst of a housing affordability crisis, not just in Massachusetts, but this is certainly well agreed to be an epicenter of it. Kamala Harris wants to provide down payment assistance. Maura Healey and Michelle Wu want a transfer tax to help build affordable housing. What solutions do you see that you might be able to implement if you were at the federal
Well, there's two things. One, Massachusetts, let's acknowledge the problem. Massachusetts, last time I checked, is the third highest in the country for housing. The average home in Massachusetts, if you go Commonwealth wide, is 650,000, which is 200,000 more than the national average. If you get to the greater Boston area, it's $980,000 for your typical home. We're now the second most expensive state to live in the country and beat out California in many regards. So it's an issue that needs to be addressed. I think that investing in Western Mass is part of the solution. I think that you have to fight for a high-speed rail from Boston to Springfield. That's part of the solution that I would say. We can't ignore the western part of the state any longer as part of the solutions. And so that's something that I would support, and that would ease some of that housing situation. But you also got to secure the border, because it's exasperating the migrants coming in, and nothing against the migrants. If anyone can identify with people who want a better life, it's me, trust me. But it's unsustainable, so we have to secure the border. The other thing we would do is I would write bills that allow for tax credits for developers to develop housing. I'm talking to developers, and they tell me it takes two years to pull the necessary permits, and that's then after when they start seeing delays. And so we've got to eliminate the red tape. And so I would also include tax credits for low-income housing. I'm someone who lived in low-income housing for the first 20 years of my life. Well, the first 18, I went to college. So the first 18 years of my life. And so that would be part of the overall solution.
Yeah, the legislature recently passed, and Governor Healy signed into law, free community college, kind of following in the footsteps of states like Tennessee. And Cape Cod Community College is one institution that closed applications early because of their surge in applications. I'm wondering if you think there should be a similar program implemented at a federal level, and if you think that would receive bipartisan support.
Well, I think so. And one thing we can all agree, education costs. I have two kids that recently graduated college. My daughter Olivia, 2 years ago, graduated USC. My daughter Jordan, just this last May, graduated UMass Amherst. So I personally can attest to how expensive that college has become. It's part of the first answer I gave about, could a kid do what I did, right? Today, have they been priced out of the economy? And so federal subsidies and the federal government working with state government, creating subsidies and tax credits to encourage, make education more accessible, but also vocational. College isn't for everyone. And we need to make an investment in vocational jobs as well. And I think that that's something I would certainly get behind, because it's not a political slogan to me when I say I want to help people like me. Not me today, because I'm 57 years old and I've achieved financial success and whatnot. But I've been saying on the campaign, and I mean it sincerely, I don't want to be one of the last poor people to make it out of the ghetto and the hood and poverty. I genuinely want to try to help lift people up, and the federal government bears some responsibility in making sure that there's access to the American dream. And right now, my fear is that that dream is being killed, and that we're really to a point where there's just the haves and the have-nots, and there is no path for the have-nots to become part of the haves. And it's why I'm in this race.
That's going to do it for our live broadcast. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us, but this conversation with John Deaton is going to continue. You can look for excerpts on MassLive. So thanks.